With the new GDP growth rate numbers out, the India story remains positive. It's positive just not from a national standpoint, but if you look at India, compare it with other comparable economies or any large economy in the world, then the numbers do indicate that we are headed in a positive direction. But there are obviously concerns. The manufacturing sector needs to grow more. Inflation is a constant concern, perhaps less than it has been in the past, but perhaps a lot more needs to be done as well. To discuss that and a lot more, we are joined by Mr. Dinesh. He's the new CII president. Thanks very much for being with us. So let's talk first about the GDP number, 7.2%. That is higher than what was initially projected. Is this where you expected India to be at this stage?
Thank you. And yes, to a great extent, I think it's nice to see it slightly exceeding, but we were hoping actually it would be so. And that is because when we looked at the survey which we had done with our CEOs, we actually found more positive feedback coming in the last quarter. But having said that, that gives us the confidence and the comfort that the year ahead, I think we will not only be able to weather the global storm, but also make sure that the India still stays, as you said, way ahead of the rest of the world. Yeah. So our belief is that that places us in a very strong position to be able to get a 7.5 to 7.6, and I would veer towards a 6.7 rather than a 6.5 as the rate of growth.
The IMF has projected, about 5.9% next year. Significantly lower than a lot of our own projections. So how do you actually assess that?
No, I believe that things are definitely far better at the ground level than the 5.9%. That's why I'm saying that we are looking at around 6.7% rate of growth. And if you look at all of the factors at the ground level, I think that would be a more likely scenario from a CII perspective, and which is exactly what I think has happened in this year as well. As you said, the number has surprised on the positive side rather than as was expected that it will be lower.
Why is India a global outlier?
I would say there are three facts for that. First is the fact how we managed, or I would call it kudos to this government for having managed the coming out of COVID scenario, where instead of spending on trying to increase consumption, they actually kept the powder dry for spending on infrastructure. This core focus on infrastructure has actually led to a virtuous cycle. What is a virtuous cycle? It has meant that the money becomes more available for the domestic consumer. That has driven up domestic demand immediately after COVID. That has attracted the attention of the rest of the world that maybe we are, as you said, become a significant outlier, and therefore capital comes in to invest into India. And as that increases, or as the demand in India increases, the opportunity for export then comes in. So all, I would call it, this virtuous cycle of growth has well set in, and of course that is all based on the transformational reforms which have taken place over the years, and you see the outcome of that. Maybe you would have seen it earlier if COVID had not happened, but compared with the rest of the world, the fact we are shining, or significantly shining higher, is the way in which we smartly manage coming out of COVID.
Do you believe the impact of the Ukraine war, which isn't ending anytime soon, it appears, continues to be having some sort of bearing on us? For example, food inflation was a concern internationally, not just India. Do you believe that that is still a factor for us? Of course, the entire fuel situation we managed differently than many other countries, and that's worked to our benefit. So two factors linked to Ukraine, food insecurity or food inflation, and the entire fuel situation. How would you address these?
So there, I mean, you have actually voiced the exact what I would call the headwinds or potential headwinds which we have looked at, right? And that the Ukraine crisis does not become any worse, and that or any other new geopolitical issues does not arise. That is, I think, a core focus or core challenge which we will face if anything happens on that front. As of today, I think that is being taken into account when we look at that this continuation need not affect us.
Right.
Inflation and, let us say, any other actions which the global markets may take or global countries may take to offset it is definitely a big issue. As of now, again, we don't see anything negative on the anvil. If you look at US or Europe, which were all, we were thinking that they may get into recession, even though there have been few quarters which this has happened, I don't think it's significant for us to worry about. Having said that, on the domestic front, monsoon is something we wish to watch out for. Again, El Nino does not necessarily mean that every El Nino is a bad year. So those are the reasons why I would call it more realistically optimistic than we were earlier.
Are you optimistic about the agriculture sector, given that the IMD has said that it's going to be a normal monsoon plus minus 4%?
The two reasons for that. One, like I said, we also heard that there is going to be the Indian Ocean Dipole,
Yes.
which I think has always resulted, especially in some of the, some parts of the country actually getting significantly higher amounts of rainfall. And at least from what we hear today from IMD, I don't think there seems a significant cause for worry, even though certain pockets may be affected.
Right.
But that may still be something which I think we as a country can manage.
Sure.
And you did mention about food security. I think India has again done a lot of work in terms of making sure that we may not really have challenges on that front.
Right.
So I do believe again that they are all factors which we need to be watching out for, but not something which need to worry us immediately.
Let's talk a little bit about fuel. We are importing Russian fuel. It has served us quite well. It's brought down costs. We are, of course, re-exporting a lot of the fuel that we import. Tell us about how that's a move that has integral benefits to our economy, and we have seen that over the last several months.
I think we have to obviously laud the government in terms of the effort which they have taken to make that happen. Not just the focus on Russia, but also making sure that we have the best, we have to protect our interests first, which is what I think Indian industry is thankful for. And as of now, we are assuming that will continue. I don't think that scenario is going to change dramatically, because even if you look at the price caps, etc., they're going to benefit us rather than vice versa.
Sure.
So all in all, again, factor to watch out for, but not a worry.
Okay. Let's talk about the manufacturing sector. The growth has been a problem. Financial year 2023, a growth of just about 1%. What is CII going to do to sort of address or talk a little bit about the manufacturing sector? Is it sort of lagging behind where we would ideally like to see it?
So yes, if you look at the whole year FY23, it has been a 1%. But if you look at the last quarter, both from actual rate of growth and also the GVA rate of growth, you actually see manufacturing having come back quite significantly. And that, I believe, is actually the forerunner for the future. In fact, the forecast for 23-24 is based on the fact that manufacturing will come back.
Right.
And why do we believe so? I think, the fact that, at least I have been going as part of CII, every country you visit to, the significant level of interest to look at India, for its domestic market and then as an export destination is very, very high. And many of those investments have actually started to come in.
Right.
So that, I think, is what will really help us from an overall, I would call it anecdotal evidence which we see today.
Sure.
But equally at the ground level, from CII side, we are obviously making sure that we support not only the manufacturing sector, but also work on the cost of doing business, which I think has been a core focus for this government. And in fact, we are saying we will do a cost of doing business survey for sector-wise, so that then we can identify what further needs to be done to make Indian manufacturing more competitive and actually help it grow. Obviously, we are also working on the MSME sector to support them, because they are the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 partners of the larger corporates. Yes. And these are the two core focus areas for us to support manufacturing.
Inflation is below the Reserve Bank's threshold of 6%. But some would suggest that we need to bring it substantially lower. Are you happy about where we are presently as far as the inflation rate is concerned?
I would say that 4.7% compared with what is happening in the rest of the world is a very, very comfortable situation to be in. And India on the whole has had higher rates of inflation in the past and managed. So therefore, inflation is not good, definitely, but we don't believe that inflation should be curtailed at the cost of growth. And RBI has never done that in the recent past. So I believe that will be the case by which we will look at.
So you don't expect any further RBI changes to the rates and things like that to bring down inflation any further? You believe it's okay where it is?
Yes. In fact, our recommendation to RBI has been first the pause, and I think the stance was actually earlier aggressive, meaning that there could be a rate increase. We are saying that now that it has come to 4.7, that they could actually look at a neutral stance.
Sure. I just want to come back to the fuel question. Last year, global Brent crude prices hit a record of $130 a barrel. They're down now to almost half, about $75. But that's not been passed on to consumers like you and me at one level. Some would suggest that if the benefits of that were transferred to consumers, then it would spur a lot more growth, a lot more spending would be possible, etc., etc. So how do you see that?
See, actually, if it's a fine balance, right? Because if you look at it on the other side, you want the capex investment in infrastructure to continue. and obviously a portion of this funding is going to go to support it. So therefore, I wouldn't say I would be trying to be dictate as to that should be passed on. Rather, I would say continue the focus on capex, continue the infrastructure spend, make sure that the cost of doing business of India comes down. That itself will generate, like I said, the virtuous cycle starts when the cost of doing business goes down. It's the same as inflation. You could always say a higher rate of inflation will mean higher rate of growth, but people will suffer. So we don't want that negative scenario taking place in the same cost of making sure that if you give more money to the consumer, yes, it could spur demand, but it could affect other things.
One of the key focal areas for India is obviously a green economy going forward. As CII president, how is that something which is going to be a key issue of yours? We've got our 2030 goals as well. There are huge expenses involved in so many sectors to make this transition. For example, the auto sector is in the middle of a transition at so many levels. How are you at CII going to be focusing on that as you work with industry?
In fact, that's one of the very core focus areas for us, and for 3-4 reasons. I mean, you also mentioned some of them. First is that sustainability is going to be part of every activity which we do. It is not some separate plan. I think this government and the Prime Minister have actually very clearly articulated where we are going to head and how are we going to get there. Now the question is, as you said, how does industry and the government work together to make that transition? I see there are 2 challenges in that. One is what you said, which is funding that, and making sure that as we move towards a transition, we are not affecting our economic growth and our ability to be competitive as an industry. So whether it is access to capital or access to technology to make it even more sustainable, I think that's one core focus which we will be working on. The second is making sure that we have, I would call it the necessary parameters laid out in place. For example, energy storage and managing how we work with the states in terms of creating the necessary infrastructure if you are going to move from to EVs or to any other form of alternate fuel. So whether it is mobility or energy transition, I think the 2 core focus areas for CII will be on how we manage the funding and the access to technology for that, while at the same time balancing the growth requirements of the economy.
So 2 questions on 2 separate sectors. One of them you've referred to briefly, the auto sector. You're talking about batteries and storage technology. There's this huge mismatch between the cost associated with the manufacture of batteries and the need for them, which is absolutely important. Unless the costs of manufacturing batteries go down dramatically, then that entire auto sector going forward will be difficult for the middle class consumer to actually engage with. They'll be looking for options which are cheaper and yet which are dirtier. How do you emphasize this as a real concern going forward as India tries to progress to our 2030 goals?
I think the first priority from a CII perspective is to look at public mobility. And if you solve that big challenge, then I think you are already building, so to say, the ecosystem to enable you get the cost of manufacturing down. So I think the way I would look at it is make sure that we get an ability to get clean and green mobility at the public level or public transport level, which I think are the cities, the city movements, etc. And then look at what all we will need to do for sector-wise. We will definitely be looking at sector-wise studies in terms of how we approach this. And as you know, it is not just EV. Today there are various alternative technologies which are also being talked about and which are coming. So the green hydrogen machine is something which we will look at. We will also look at seeing how we can support some other form of higher technology product manufacturing. So all of it is in different stages of evolution, and as the evolution progresses, I think we just need to make sure we make the right choices. So from CII side, we will support that.
Right. One final question, the IT sector. This is something, we are a digital economy at so many levels right now. But some would suggest that if you look at the IT sector and manufacturing together, semiconductor technology is so very important. How do you see India as a major semiconductor manufacturer going forward absolutely essential in propelling our digital economy and helping manufacturing at so many levels?
So 2 of the core focus areas for CII is actually to make sure that I would call it we harness new technology to our benefit. And in that there are 2 elements, which one is digital, I mean obviously usage of AI and I would call it the responsible usage.
You aren't wary of AI, are you?
No, I'm saying the responsible usage of AI, right? So we want to make sure that we actually harness it to the benefit of the industry or the benefit of the people and not actually make it in the reverse. Because as you have been seeing very recently, there have been a lot of concerns raised as to how it could be misused. The second element of it is on the semiconductor itself. Actually, we are forming a task force to work with the government and see how we can support, and both from a private sector or private to private partnerships, as well as obviously the government will be working on, I'm sure, bringing in, and we want to work to support that.
Right.
So we are forming a task force which will work with the government and support the semiconductors and see what we can do to make that happen.
Right.
So whether it is advanced technologies or harnessing the use of what I would call the intelligent uses of digital data, that's what we will be supporting to make sure India is future ready.
All right, Mr. Dinesh, congratulations. CII President, awesome responsibilities over there. Thank you so much for speaking to us.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the time.